The terminal and the architect. The fluorescent lights of the Grand Central Terminal were a perpetual hum, a sound that protagonist Alara had long grown accustomed to. She moved the crowd with practiced ease, her briefcase held securely in one hand, her mind already on the impending 10-hour train ride to Toronto. But her journey was abruptly halted by a voice that cut through the cacophony. "Ma'am, this is for official business only," the transit officer said, his smile a carefully constructed mask of professional neutrality. Alara paused, her steps faltering. She hadn't jumped the line. She hadn't said a word. She was simply a woman waiting her turn in the designated line for government employees. A quick glance over her shoulder confirmed her suspicions. No one else was being questioned. The officer's eyes weren't on her briefcase or her ticket or the laptop bag slung over her shoulder. They were on her tailored suit, on the intricate braids woven into her hair, on the very skin she wore. "I am with the Department of Justice," she stated, her voice calm and steady. "I have priority status for expedited processing." The officer's eyebrow arched, not in a gesture of simple verification, but of outright challenge. "The Department of Justice, you say?" "Yes," she affirmed. He let out a short, dry chuckle. "Lots of people try that to get ahead of the line, ma'am. Doesn't fly here." "I'm not trying to get ahead," Alara replied, her patience wearing thin. "I am following federal protocol." He ignored her, his gaze sweeping over her once more. "Look, you can't just say you're with the government. This line's for official business, not for anyone who shows up with a confident story." "I can present my credentials," she offered, her tone still measured and level. "That won't be necessary," he snapped, the veneer of politeness cracking. "People like you always have some sort of tale." The phrase, "people like you," was a low blow, not shouted, not overtly malicious, but dripping with the quiet wave of assumption. It was a dismissal born of a history she carried every single day. "Ma'am, step aside. This is your final warning." A man behind her sighed audibly. A woman whispered. "What'd she try to prove?" The officer hadn't checked her ID. He hadn't radioed for confirmation. He had simply decided that she didn't belong. The officer leaned in closer. "Unless you have a magic badge in that bag, I suggest you move along." Alara took a breath. Her fingers moved the lapel of her suit jacket, unbuttoning a small, concealed pocket. From it, she produced a slender black leather wallet. She flicked it open. The badge inside, the seal of the Federal Bureau of Investigations, glinted under the terminal's lights. "Special Agent Alara Vance," she said, her voice dropping to a firm, quiet tone. "And you just profiled a federal officer on duty." The silence that followed was absolute, a heavy stillness in the bustling terminal. It wasn't awkward. It was a reckoning. Someone in the crowd was already recording the scene on their phone. Alara didn't wait for a response. She simply held the badge for a moment, letting the weight of her authority settle, then tucked it away and walked past the now pale officer without breaking stride. As she made her way to her gate, the incident's aftershocks began to ripple. The video, a short clip capturing the entire exchange, went viral almost instantly. The caption read, "Imagine if she didn't have ID." On the train to Toronto, Alara's phone buzzed relentlessly. The messages were a mix of outrage and support, but her mind was elsewhere. The humiliation was familiar, a recurring theme in her professional life. She knew the badge wasn't just for power. It was a shield against the assumption that her identity was a perpetual question mark. Upon landing, a new message from her office was waiting. "Please report to the Compliance Department for review. Public exposure regarding the recent incident requires an internal assessment." There were no words of support, no congratulations, just a cold, procedural summons. The embarrassment she felt wasn't important to them. What mattered was the public scrutiny now cast upon the institution. 2 days later, she sat in a sterile conference room across from 2 internal affairs officers. They asked her why she didn't de-escalate, why she hadn't quietly redirected the situation. They didn't ask about her feelings or the officer's behavior. She answered with precision, her words carefully chosen, knowing they could be weaponized against her. She signed the report and walked out, not with anger, but with profound weariness. The next morning, an envelope with no return address lay on her desk. Inside was a handwritten note. He did the same thing to my brother, told him he was too nervous to be flying, humiliated him in a private screening. We had no badge to show. Thank you. The note was a catalyst. This wasn't a personal affront. It was a pattern. Ilera didn't file a complaint. She filed a request for a review of all civilian reports filed against Transit Officer Daniel Evans over the last 5 years. She wasn't out to prove he was a bigot. She was out to prove the system that protected him was broken. She began compiling her case. The internal reviews of complaints against Evans all ended with the same phrases: insufficient evidence, no clear misconduct. The complainants were almost exclusively people of color. She also found a staff memo discreetly praising Evans' firm enforcement style, a coded phrase for his aggressive profiling. The media, after a brief surge of outrage, moved on. But Ilera didn't. She met with a former mentor, a deputy director in internal security review. She presented him with a folder containing her meticulously collected evidence. "Do you want to open a case?" he asked after reviewing the documents. "I want oversight," she said without hesitation. "A real audit from outside the authority. This will mean visibility," he warned. "Not just for him, but for you." Ilera looked him squarely in the eye. "Visibility has never protected me, but transparency might protect someone else." He took the folder and promised to elevate it. That same week, she received 2 calls. One from HR, reminding her to be mindful of the broader implications of her actions. The other was an anonymous woman's voice. "I worked with Evans years ago. I saw how he treated black women. I filed a complaint. They just transferred me instead of him." Each new piece of information confirmed it. Officer Daniel Evans was not just a bad actor. He was a protected one, a cog in a system designed to absorb and dismiss such incidents. But this time, the story didn't fade. Ilera's file quietly made its way to a federal oversight board. And then a small, yet significant announcement was made. The Department of Transportation announced a sudden internal audit into bias-related complaints within its security departments. There were no names, no acknowledgments, but those who were watching knew exactly what it meant. In the wake of the audit, no headlines named Daniel Evans, but his quiet absence was noted. His co-workers started to whisper, not about his bad luck, but about how he had finally pushed the wrong one. Ilera, for her part, requested a transfer. She joined a small task force within the Office of Civil Rights and Civil Liberties, a unit dedicated to reviewing patterns of misconduct in federal transportation. She didn't seek the spotlight. She sought a seat at the table where policy was written and where officers like Evans were shielded. She attended every meeting, armed with her files and her evidence. She pushed for changes to officer evaluation standards, demanding a clause that would mandate a review of repeated complaints, even if individual cases were dismissed. She fought for the collection of racial demographics and security data, a step no one had ever formally taken. She proposed training that focused not just on sensitivity, but on accountability with tangible consequences. Slowly, change began to take hold. A new bias review protocol was implemented in a pilot program across 3 major transportation hubs. A clause she had drafted made its way into the new policy. Her name wasn't on it, but that didn't matter. She wasn't building for credit. She was building for the people in the handwritten letters, for the passengers who had to choose between silence and escalation. Daniel Evans never returned to his position. He quietly filed for early retirement. The transit authority's new recruitment materials for supervisors included phrases like inclusive enforcement standards. It was bureaucratic language, but it signaled a shift. Ilera didn't celebrate. Accountability, she had learned, didn't feel like victory. It felt like the absence of the next humiliation, like walking to the terminal and not being stopped, not because they recognized her name, but because the system itself had changed. She remained in her new role, out of the spotlight. She was not the face of change, but its quiet, determined architect.